Hello everybody, welcome back to another tutorial. Today I want to talk about kick drums and how you can use a reference kick to improve your kick drums, some of the techniques that you can use to make it maybe sound a little bit more similar or to draw inspiration from the kick that you have previously extracted. If you haven't seen my video on extracting kick drums from reference tracks, then I highly recommend you watch that first. It's the last video I put out. And it's going to be the basis of this video, because this video is going to rely on you having a reference kick that you can work with. The final thing that I quickly want to say before getting into this video is that it's not our goal to exactly copy what the reference kick is doing, mainly just drawing inspiration from it. At the end of the day, we are trying to create our own kick drums and not copy somebody else's work. So without further ado, let's get into the tutorial. Hey guys, I just wanted to quickly say, if you want to support this channel, go to my Spotify or Apple Music. There you can follow me and add some of my songs to your daily listening playlist. Thank you very much. Let's get back into the video. So here is the setup. I'm quickly going to zoom out so I can show you the project. This is a project where I just experiment with a whole bunch of different ideas here. So now I'm not a person that really creates its own kick, in the sense that I don't have a kick synthesizer and start from scratch. I like to work from samples. And I don't think there's much of a shame in it. In fact, I think it speeds up my workflow a lot, because I spend virtually no time at the start of my production worrying about the kick. And I usually, when a production is at the point where I say, okay, this is an idea that I actually want to work on, then I'll go in and do all of this kind of processing on an actual kick drum to make it sound as good as I want. But for the start of a production, I can just quickly get an idea out with the kick sample, just drawing, no processing on it. And it just allows me to be a lot quicker at the very start of production, which I find very, very important. So for today, what we're going to be looking at is this kick here. It's from a track called Full Throttle. The original is by Alpha Portal, and this is actually the kick from the GMS remix of that track. And it sounds like this. Let's just have a listen. It's a very nice, very tight kick, and I really like it, and that's why I chose it for this tutorial. And I've used the technique that I've shown in the last video to split it out, get all of the components out of there, and to get the kick without any of the other things in the track, because the other things sound like this. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and I just decided to get the kick clean out of there. Again, if you haven't seen that tutorial, I highly recommend that you watch it first, so you understand how to get a kick like this from a track that sounds that full. So now, in order to remake this kick, what we need to do is we need to first get our source. And it's fairly important that you look at a few things. One is that the kick that you're looking for has the same kind of length and the same kind of pitch envelope. Now, I got a version that sounds very, very close to the original. So again, if we listen to the original, and then we listen to this kick, you can hear that there is some cleaning up to do. So that's what we're going to start with. So there's a few things that we notice just looking at the waveform. One is that there's a little bit of a wobble here. And two, if we listen to it, it's a little bit noisy. It sounds like there is some noise continuing in the kick drum, right? It doesn't sound as clean as, for example, this kick. So let's actually get into fixing those two problems first, so that we can work a lot better with this kick. The way I'm going to do that is by use of the same technique that we used for extracting the kick drum. And this is actually also a great technique to just clean up a kick drum that's already extracted, because obviously you're getting these different layers here that you can then polish up as much as you want. So I've just quickly recorded this kick drum in here. As you can see, these are all of its components. And we're going to try to clean it up as much as possible. We can already see where the first problem is coming from. You can see a little bit of a wobble here. So we can just kind of fade that out. We don't really need that. And then secondly, we will remove some of this part here to get this nice in there. And for the higher end, it's just a matter of cleaning it up, getting rid of all of the start here, making sure that there's no weird noise things happening, no distortion, nothing. So just looking at the waveform, you can already see that it's a lot cleaner here. And just by listening to it, you can hear that there's also no more noisy component in it. And just as a reminder, the old one sounded like this, so you can hear there's a big difference here. So now we can start working on making this kick sound more like our reference kick, or drawing inspiration from our reference kick. And the way I like to do that is just setting up two EQs and looking at some of the volumes between them. So let's start by setting that up. I'm going to place this in my work area here, and I'm going to make a new track for the reference. So this is now my work area. As you can see, we have our source kick and our reference kick. And the way I'm going to do this is by kind of manually EQ matching the two kicks together. I'm going to open up an EQ here. So we'll just use M equalizer for now, which has a nice preset that I like to use for the analyzer. So this is my advanced preset, which shows a whole bunch of different things. The only thing that I'm not interested in now is track peaks. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to copy this plugin over here. And this allows us to basically see the two spectrums here. I'm going to just place my cursor in there so I can open this all the way up, and we can get the biggest meter possible. So yeah, now we can start doing some EQ matching. Now, as you can see from this blue curve here, they are actually very, very similar. This is almost scary how similar these two EQ curves already look. You can see this little bump here, which is also there. We have this little dip here, which is also there. We have this little ripples there, which kind of match here. But there's still some things that we can fix. I'm starting actually to suspect that this might be the original sample used for our reference kick as well. And that's scary that I was able to match that so closely, that I was able to find a kick that might have actually been the starting point for the kick that was eventually used in the real track. So we're just going to EQ this so we can get some of the levels the same. Now the first one to take note at is this level here. So we're aiming to get it around there, which in particular is that spike. Bring that up, and we need to compensate and lower this part a little bit. And it's a good practice to sometimes reset your EQ. I'm gonna go kind of like that, maybe a bit more like that, get that as steep as possible. And we want to add a little bit of stuff here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it like that, keep this maybe a little bit closer still, and just turn down the Q levels. So we're really shaping this hum down, basically. Maybe that's a bit too much. Okay, that's starting to match a bit. We can now start matching this area here. So there's a little bit of an extra peak, which we can add to it as well. Kind of like this. Now we're losing some of that area there. Again, let's reset the analyzer a bit. Almost want a bit more here. And thus a bit less there and a bit more there. Okay, With this kind of detail work, seeing as we're missing one more bend here, what I like to do is do that in a separate EQ. So we can already quickly do that just after this one, so we don't forget. And as you can see, that's just right about here, right in this just above 100 area. And that's just going to be a little boost here. Now that does mean that it's not going to show up in this interface here, but we just have to remind ourselves that there is a little bit of that extra hum there. Now if you want to do this a little bit more efficiently, what you could opt to do is use a sidechain analyzer. What I don't recommend doing is using any form of EQ matching, because I found that on kicks that doesn't really work because of the very sharp transient and very sharp change in frequency of the material that's actually played. So keep that in mind when you're doing this kind of stuff, that it's better to use something like what you're doing here visually, or using, as I said, a sidechain input on one EQ and then matching it manually, but not to start off with something like a spectrum match, basically. So now we can quickly move on to the next. Let me play this again a few times. We can start to move on to the next, and we can start to look at boosting a little bit of this area here, which are definitely missing. So we're gonna go like that, and then finally we'll give this also a boost with just a normal peak to this area to really hump that out. And I'm just looking at the levels, seeing where the levels kind of sit here. I might go down and dip this area a little bit. As you can see, that's that area there, so that definitely needs a dip. We can open up our second EQ for that. So that would be, I'm just kind of counting these lines for this EQ. So 1, 2, 3, 4, around the fourth one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's give that a little dip, like so. What 5 dB should do. Maybe not even that, maybe just 3.7, something like that. And now we've exhausted this EQ here. So you can see that basically up until the fifth one, I'm kind of happy with how our kick looks using these first two EQs. And now we can just repeat the process. We just open it up with a new EQ, go to settings, and I'm going to go into my analyzer, turn off the peaks, and then we just drag it down again and we start over. As you can see, I'm pretty happy with how this curves look. We might want to dip a little bit out of this area here. It doesn't have to be that precise, obviously. But now we can move on to the next region. And as you can see, there's a bit of extra volume over there. So I'm just going to, with a rather large curve, boost this up until we're about at the same region. And then it's just a matter of maybe introducing those two little clicks in there. So we can use EQ bands for that. Again, we're going to set this to peak, and I'm just going to set the Q very, very strong and very, very steep. Maybe that's a bit too much. Like that. There's another dip there, which we want to remove. Probably. That again might be a bit much. Something like that, maybe just a little bit more. That should do the job. It's not very important in the high end, and some things to look out for is how it rolls off. You can see this one rolls off a little bit less than my kick here, our source kick, but that's actually pretty okay. At this high end, it doesn't really matter how far the roll off is, because you're not really going to hear that anyway. And we can also see that my kick is actually also cleaner in the low end than our reference kick. So that's also good news. We have actually EQ'd this kick pretty nicely, I would say, and it's already starting to sound a lot nicer. So let's just group and get a before and after. Now this isn't the best A-B result here because we're adding a lot of volume to it, so it's going to also sound louder. But if we look at our reference kick is also louder than the kick that we have here. So that's actually a good thing. We're getting closer to the loudness target that we're aiming for here. So let's actually record this and we can get into the next kind of stage here. And the next stage is just to check if there's any ambiguities, if there's any weird stuff happening in the kick. And the one thing I can see is that we maybe have a little bit too much of a volume wobble there, although I don't think that's going to be a very big problem. The other thing that I'm starting to notice here is that our tail is extending into the bass part here. So let's actually fix that, and we can get on with the next bit. And that is deciding if you want to add any head on top of it. Now this reference kick does not have a head. As you can hear, it's pretty dry in the top end. But I like to sometimes add a little bit of a head on top of it, and I also kind of just want to show you how you would go about doing that. So let's drop in an audio track for the head. So this will be the kick and this will be the head. And we group these two together so we can maybe process them together. Call this mix. And for the head in this project, I've been experimenting a lot with adding different heads on top of it and how you would do that. And I found a technique that I find pretty useful and that works pretty well for me. So let's actually look at that. And it's this kick 2 over here. You can see some head renders that I've done. And this is using different compression techniques on the head. So this is an uncompressed head here. And what you need to notice is that the uncompressed head, in terms of the timing, it's a little bit hard to see down below here because it's red. I'm missing some files and I'm unable to really fix that in this particular project because I've already deleted them out of the window here and they don't seem to go away. But if I select this head, you can see that we have 26 milliseconds of duration. But what you'll find is that here the kick, you have this kick transient and then it goes a lot lower in volume in the part where the head really sits. So what I've been doing is I've been mimicking that by just removing some of the tail of it with some compression. So let's go and do that with our own kick here. So I'm going to search out a hi-hat and I'm just going to go in here, and I like these closed ones. Let's for example try this one here. Now I want to make some room for the transient of the kick itself because we don't really need the head there. And obviously, as I said, we want about 20 to 25 milliseconds here, not much longer. So let's set it to about there. And I'm just slightly going to fade that out. Maybe a bit less, maybe something like that. We can consolidate it to create a new file. And now we can get into the compression. So for the compression on this hi-hat, what I like to do, as I said, is I want to kind of mimic this going up here and then starting to drop in volume just like the kick is doing here. So to do that, I'm just going to set very specific values for attack and release, or mainly for the attack. First of all, I want to do peak detection, so I wanted to detect anything as quickly as possible. And then I want to set a attack of around 6 to 7 milliseconds. And I'm going to get rid of about 5 to 6 decibels of volume here with the threshold and the ratio control. Something like that. Let's listen to that together with our kick. So that's starting to sound nice, but it's not really mixed that well. So I'm just going to turn down the volume until I like where it sits in the overall kick head balance. Maybe a bit lower still. Something like that. And the final thing that I want to do is I just want to make this mono, because you can see the left channel is louder than the right channel. You can also see that in the waveform. But you can see the left channel being louder than the right, so let's just make it mono. So it sits nicely in the middle there. So then we're going to get into the final technique that I want to show you that I've been doing on almost all of my kicks, and that's a special kind of gain staging it using the glue compressor. So for this I'm going to just turn this down, let's say 2 decibels before recording. That allows me to do is that I need to bring it back up to a level so that it's 0 dB, so that it peaks at 0 dB. I'm going to talk about my gain staging setup in the next video and why 0 dB is very, very important, especially in modern day music making. It's kind of a workflow thing mainly, but just trust me for now that you want to get this to peak at 0 dB in terms of the overall volume of this particular kick. So let's take our glue compressor here, and I'm going to set an attack of 0, release of fast, and then a ratio of 2. That's going to just slightly compress it. You can see just a little bit of compression happening there. And now what we can do is we can find that track, which is this one, and we can measure the volume and set that as our makeup gain, 1.5, and now you can see it peaks at 0, which is what we want. Again, there seems to be a little bit of a discretion between left and right channel. You can see my left channel is not peaking and the right channel is. So to fix that, we'll just turn it into mono, and we'll do that before the glue compressor hits, and then we might have to do this again. So now that our kick is finished, we can start worrying about mixing it in with the bass line. And the main thing that I want to focus on is a cool trick that you can do to get it in phase with your bass line. I've correctly dragged in a bass sample that I found, and I've also dragged in Psyscope here. So we can look at it and see if there's any problems with it. And we'll probably find that there are some problems that we can fix. You can see it's a bit of a mess, although it could be worse. We can try to get this in phase so that this point here of the kick is basically on the grid, so that this transient happens very close to a 0 crossing. And the way I'm going to do that is by changing the phase of my kick using artifacts of an EQ. So I'm going to drag in an EQ on the kick here, and I'm going to remove all of the EQs bands except for the lowest one here. Now this is can also have other consequences on your bassline. You might find that the volume changes a bit and that you need to do some of the gain staging in your kick drum. But this, you can really only do this technique if you have your bassline already in there. So let's open up Psyscope so we can see what we're doing. And I'm just going to move this around and see if we can get it to shift the phase perfectly. See, it's already a little bit forward. Maybe if we just slightly bring it forward still. Maybe that's a bit too much. You can see by just bringing on this filter here, you can also see that it changes where the bassline sits. If we zoom out, you can see it's still not the cleanest, it's already a lot more in phase. Obviously you want to turn down the volume of your bassline a little bit for this example. Let's turn that down by like 5 decibels. And now you can see that our kick and our bass looks pretty good here. The only final thing that I would worry about is a little bit of compression maybe on the transient, because it is sticking out a little bit too much for my liking with respect to, for example, the sub bass here. We can do that just by using a very strong fast compressor. This is one of the artifacts that you get by using that glue compression technique that I showed before. So we're just going to set up a fairly quick compression here, and we're just going to slightly roll off the top of it. Now I want to, we can again do the same thing as we did before actually. I've just filled in that value again, just like we did with the glue compressor, but this time in M dynamics. So now we have our kick that should sound a little bit fuller. It should bring out the sub bass a bit more. So we should be able to see that on size scope actually. As opposed to this. You can see it brings it out a little bit more and makes it sound a little bit stronger in that low bass region, obviously. So that's how I process my kick drums, make them sound as good as they can be. Again, if you haven't seen the video before this on extracting kick drums, I highly recommend you watch that as well, so you can get your own reference kicks for this kind of technique, because that's very important, that you reference it closely to whatever you're doing with a professional kick, right? So that you have an idea that what you're doing actually makes sense. So that's going to be the video for today. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe. And if you want to see something in particular, leave a comment down below with what you want to see. Also, you can turn on the bell notifications to get notified by YouTube when a new video comes out. But that's going to be it for today. I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.